Mexico Water Utility Authority is receiving $18.7 million to support continued design and construction.
The Gulf of America isn't exactly a calm or quiet spot. It's packed with activity. Tons of oil and gas get pulled out of the ground here, and the Mississippi River brings loads of agricultural waste that end up polluting the water. And now, there's something else going on just off the Texas coast. A group of specialized ships has started digging, pulling up silt, sand, clay. Basically everything that makes up the seafloor. So far, over 459 million cubic feet of material have been removed, and the stretch of seabed under construction runs nearly 50 miles long. And of course, we can't skip over the cost because with a project this big, the price tag matters. Moving all that earth is expected to cost around $1.1 billion. But with a project this massive, that number isn't all that shocking. This is one of the largest dredging efforts ever done in the U.S., and believe it or not, it's all to help reach Mexico. Why? We'll get to that part in a second. In 2024, the U.S. and Mexico set a new milestone in trade. Their two-way trade hit a record-breaking $840 billion. That's not just impressive, it's the biggest trade volume the U.S. has ever had with any country. Not even China or Canada, which used to be the top trading partners, come close anymore. Mexico has taken the lead, and it doesn't look like it's slowing down. That kind of growth makes sense. About 80% of all Mexican exports go straight to the U.S., and more than 40% of Mexico's imports come from the U.S. These figures aren't just stats. They show how closely tied the two countries really are. And it's not just a one-time jump. Trade keeps climbing even after the pandemic. Things slowed a bit in 2020, but bounced back fast and have been hitting new highs every year since. Most of this trade still moves across the land border, and why wouldn't it? If you can load goods onto a truck and drive them across, it's often the simplest way. A huge portion of this traffic goes through the border city of Laredo. But here's the catch. Laredo is famous for something: massive traffic jams. In 2024 alone, more than 3 million trucks crossed over from Mexico right there. That's more than half of all land freight traffic. And it's not just the traffic. Land crossings also come with strict rules, slow bureaucracy, and other complications. Meanwhile, shipping demand isn't letting up. Nearshoring is catching on, with more factories moving from Asia to Mexico to be closer to the U.S. That's pushing even more interest toward the Gulf of America, where huge container ships like the Neo-Panamax, which can carry up to 15,000 standard containers, are ready to take over. It's one of the fastest, most efficient ways to move large amounts of goods without delays. And right near the border, there's one major port that stands out: the Port of Houston. Let's talk numbers. When it comes to cargo tonnage, Houston leads the country. In 2024 alone, the public terminals there handled 53 million tons of cargo. If you're looking for something to compare that to, here's a fun example. Think about France's most famous landmark. In just 1 year, the Port of Houston moved cargo equal in weight to over 5,000 Eiffel Towers. And that number keeps growing. When it comes to container volume, Houston ranks 5th in the U.S. In 2024, it handled more than 4.1 million TEUs. Even more impressive, 74% of all container traffic in the Gulf of America passed through Houston. This port isn't just busy, it's one of the major shipping gateways into the country. The Port of Houston is also strongly connected to Mexico. In 2023 alone, it handled $24.9 billion worth of trade with its southern neighbor, and that number has held steady. Trade between Houston and Mexico has ranked near the top for several years. And yes, Neo-Panamax ships are already using the port. The problem? They're doing it under tough conditions and not fully loaded. These massive vessels have to pass through the Houston Ship Channel, which in many places is only 525 feet wide. That might sound manageable, but it's tight when two huge ships have to pass each other. To handle that, ship captains use a technique nicknamed the Texas chicken. They actually steer slightly toward one another, using water pressure and currents to avoid hitting each other. It's a bold move that works, but feels more like a close call than a long-term solution. There's also the issue of depth. Much of the channel is only 45 feet deep, while fully loaded Neo-Panamax ships need 50 feet. In short, the channel limits how these large vessels can be used, and that means Houston can't take full advantage of the newer, more efficient shipping options. Now think about this. Every year, there are more ships, more containers, and more trade with Mexico. And all of that has to pass through a channel that isn't deep or wide enough for today's largest ships. In that case, Houston stops being the obvious choice for replacing land routes or handling major trade flow. That's exactly why new excavation work started near Houston. More specifically, we're talking about Project 11. You might be wondering why it's called Project 11. Simple. It's the 11th upgrade to the Houston Ship Channel. But this one's the biggest and most demanding so far. Just the planning took over a decade. By 2022, all the approvals, designs, and environmental reviews were done. Then dredging crews got to work. One of the main goals is widening the tight spots in the channel. For example, they plan to expand the Galveston Bay section from 525 feet to 699 feet wide. That'll let large vessels move through more safely and without those tricky maneuvers. They're also deepening the upper part of the channel to 46 feet. Overall, the updates will cover 40 miles out of the 58-mile channel. That's most of the entire system. It's also important to mention that the project team realized the risks right away. Since there aren't any backup routes, construction could easily cause serious traffic delays on the water. To avoid that, they split the project into 6 sections and 12 smaller construction phases. That way, crews could work on different parts at the same time without throwing everything into chaos. By 2023, 2 key sections, called 1A and 2, were already finished. The Port of Houston and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers worked together to make sure progress kept moving steadily. Everything came together smoothly and right on schedule. These first stages proved the plan was solid. Contractors, equipment, and logistics all performed exactly as expected. In the winter of 2024, the third section, Segment 1B, was completed. It runs nearly 8 miles from Redfish Reef to Bayport, and it's considered one of the most crucial parts of the entire project. That's why they brought in the heavy-duty dredgers for this section, basically the best of the best in American dredging. They used top-tier ships, Avalon from Curtin Maritime, C.R. McCaskill from Weeks Marine, and General Arnold from Callan Marine. Each of these handled the massive job of lifting material from the seabed, and they did it with precision. On board, everything's high-tech. For example, modern navigation systems track the exact location of every scoop. There's almost no room for error here. Big cargo ships can't handle unexpected shallow spots or narrow stretches. Luckily, each dredger pulled off the job and managed the huge volumes of material that needed to be removed. Other types of equipment helped out too. Some were a bit less advanced, but still essential. There were self-propelled hopper dredgers, which can collect the removed soil right into their own storage areas. Mechanical dredgers were also used. These floating units are great for tougher, compacted soil and places where cutter suction dredgers can't move freely. Just to give you an idea, Curtin Maritime alone removed around 134 million cubic feet of seabed material during this segment, and across the first 2 segments, Galveston Bay has already lost about 432 million cubic feet of what used to be at the bottom. Right now, work is moving ahead on Segment 1C, which runs from Bayport to Barber's Cut. It's expected to be completed sometime in 2025, probably between summer and early fall. This section is the last part of the channel that the Port of Houston is in charge of. After that, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will take over to finish the rest, dredging, widening, and everything else that's still left to do. So when will the whole project be done? According to the current timeline, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is set to finish the remaining work by 2029. Of course, big infrastructure projects like this often face delays, especially with all the risks and moving parts involved. But remember, this is already the 11th update to the Houston Ship Channel, so the process is well tested, and the risks are pretty minimal at this point. Plus, this upgrade is so critical for expanding trade with Mexico. And beyond that, everyone involved is clearly motivated to stay on track. Once it's finished, there won't be any more Texas chicken maneuvers. That's probably the best way to describe what the results will look like. Widening the channel to 699 feet in key sections isn't just a nice goal on paper. It creates real, safe space for large ships. Vessels that once had to squeeze by each other will be able to pass smoothly, even with traffic coming the other way. The benefits? More efficiency, fewer delays, and the Port of Houston becoming a top choice for trade between the U.S. and Mexico. And of course, we can't forget the depth upgrades. Those are almost the most important part of Project 11. Once all the work is finished, the depth of key sections in the channel will reach 46 feet. That sounds like a win, but remember, we mentioned earlier that fully loaded Neo-Panamax ships need about 50 feet of depth. So, technically, these container ships still won't be able to pass through the Houston Ship Channel at full load. Even so, thanks to Project 11, they'll be able to carry a much heavier load than they can right now. The goal is for them to move with 15,000 to 17,000 TEUs on board. That's a big upgrade in efficiency, and it could seriously reduce the strain on trucks and trains moving goods overland from Mexico. And of course, this gives the U.S. more room to grow its trade with Mexico. When all is said and done, the U.S. won't just be getting a better canal, it'll be gaining a major economic lifeline. Projections show that Project 11 could add up to $200 billion a year to the country's GDP. That means not just more trade volume, but also lower costs for shipping companies, faster logistics, and stronger appeal for investors looking at the region. It's not just about the goods, it's also about the long-term economic engine this project creates. There's also a big boost for jobs, and not just in construction. Sure, dredging and the infrastructure work bring thousands of immediate jobs. But the real wave of impact will come later. As trade increases, logistics companies will grow, more warehouses will be built, and manufacturing and export businesses will expand. Estimates suggest that just in Texas, Project 11 will lead to 252,000 new jobs. Across the U.S., that number could reach over 3.37 million. So this project isn't just about easing pressure on land routes or boosting trade with Mexico. It's shaping up to be a major driver of economic growth for the whole country, especially Texas. But not everyone is happy, and in this case, the frustration didn't really start with Project 11. As we mentioned earlier, the Houston Ship Channel had already been expanded 10 times by 2022. And all that time, the dredged material from the bottom was dumped either fully or partly near residential neighborhoods like Galena Park. The engineering teams doing the dredging always insisted there was no problem. Everything was safe, they said. But test results from 2019 painted a different picture. Those tests found traces of pesticides and heavy metals like zinc, cadmium, copper, lead, mercury, and nickel, way above safe levels. Basically, the seabed had been quietly collecting years' worth of chemical waste, and then it got dug up and dumped on land, often right next to homes. Today, those areas might be covered in green grass, but underneath, there's likely still a buildup of dangerous substances. And when the wind picks up, that fine, toxic dust doesn't just stay put. It can blow straight into neighborhoods, schools, and playgrounds. That's especially worrying for people with health conditions, and industrial areas tend to have more of them. There's another problem, too: flooding. These big piles of dredged material can mess with natural drainage. During heavy rains, which are becoming more common, the water has nowhere to go. Streets flood, and if the water eats away at the edges of those piles, the pollutants can start to leak out. They can run into nearby ditches, creeks, or even homes. And once that happens, the cycle begins again: pollution, sickness, and frustration. They've officially scheduled nearly 883 million cubic feet of dredged material to be placed at local sites by 2050, and 423 million cubic feet has already been brought up from the bottom since the 11th expansion started in 2022. But let's take a moment to look at the project from a different angle. According to project leaders, 100% of the non-muddy soil from Galveston Bay is being reused to help restore natural ecosystems. That soil is being used to build about 10 acres of new islands, safe spots where birds can nest and feed. Another big chunk of it will go to restoring wetlands, around 790 acres of them. And this isn't just some vague environmental promise. These wetlands play a real role in improving water quality and helping to prevent flooding, which is a huge deal in a place like Houston that deals with heavy rains and hurricanes. The plan also includes restoring oyster reefs covering between 324 and 376 acres. These reefs act like natural filters, keeping the water cleaner and supporting fish and shellfish that the local fishing industry relies on. Now, what about the dredging machines themselves? It's easy to assume they aren't eco-friendly. After all, they dig up the seabed and release emissions. But here's something reassuring. Some of the equipment used in Project 11 includes modern dredgers with Tier 4 engines, one of the cleanest engine standards approved by federal guidelines. On top of that, once the project is done, ships will be able to move more smoothly through the channel without delays or risky maneuvers. That means less wasted fuel and lower emissions. In fact, nitrogen oxide and other air pollutants are expected to drop by 3 to 7%. It may not sound huge, but it does make a difference. Project 11 also fits into a bigger picture: the Port of Houston's long-term environmental goals. This isn't just about expanding docks and adding warehouses. The port is aiming for sustainable growth. Since 2016, it's already cut carbon emissions by 55%, and it's working toward being fully carbon neutral by 2050. Over the years, thousands of acres of wetlands and conservation areas have been created across the region thanks to earlier restoration efforts. So, yes, the Port of Houston really is trying to do things in a way that's better for nearby communities and less frustrating for environmental groups. But maybe we've talked a bit too much about what's happening in the U.S. What about Mexico? Is it stepping up too? Actually, yes. Mexico is actively working to grow its maritime trade, both with the U.S. and other countries. One of the most ambitious efforts is a full-scale upgrade of the port of Veracruz. It's one of Mexico's oldest ports and a major connection point for U.S. trade. Right now, construction is underway to completely transform its capacity. The government has invested about 7 billion pesos, or around $410 million, into the project. The goal is clear: almost triple the port's capacity, from 28 to 95 million tons of cargo a year. To do that, they're building a new terminal and the longest breakwater in Latin America, stretching a full 2.7 miles. The new facility was expected to open in April 2025. Another major port, Altamira, also on the Gulf of America, is expanding rapidly too, thanks to several development projects. These upgrades aren't just local, they're part of a national push. The big idea is to move toward modern standards, automation, digital tracking, and smarter logistics. Key initiatives like the National Infrastructure Program and the Special Ports and Fleet Program are all involved. Their goal is to bring Mexico's ports up to the level of the world's top trade hubs and to help ease the burden on land routes while boosting overall trade with the U.S. So far, it looks like the joint efforts between the two countries are moving in the right direction. Whether they'll fully deliver, we'll have to wait and see in the next few years. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed learning about this massive project and how it's shaping trade between the U.S. and Mexico, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on more stories like this. Every click helps support content that dives deep into the real changes shaping our world. See you in the next one.